Good morning, everybody. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. I just want to get a thumbs up from the team if I can continue, from Natasha or from Naz.
Please do continue, Renee.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank you so much. So a very warm welcome to everybody. It's very nice to have you all here to talk about very important subjects that impact us on a daily basis. And I think this is a two-part meeting, one being around safeguarding, and then we're going to introduce you to the next speaker who's going to take you through the Labor Relations Act. So to start off on safeguarding and the GBS sector, we know that every day in the GBS sector, we've got thousands and thousands of our young people that show up every single day. Most of them will never experience harm, but without safeguarding, some will. And we will be legally and morally responsible for these young people. Sorry, before I dive in, my name is Renee Chetty. I am the lead for both future skills as well as safeguarding within BPO. Just to set the tone, I want you to sit with one thought, and that thought being the GBS sector employs over 300 South Africans daily, sometimes over a span of a period of 5 years. Now, our young people are first-time earners, they are contract workers, they come from high pressurized environments, and they are working in a high pressurized environment as well. So these young people would depend on us and not just for salary, but also for their safety and as well as their dignity. Safeguarding is how we honor that responsibility. It is legal, it's ethical, and it is the operational foundation of everything that we do. And as you'll hear from our next speaker, it is also the foundation of the Labor Relations Act. So what I'm going to share with you today sets up for everything that you are going to hear and how that all the acts that we have and the compliance that we have is not acting on a vacuum. It is the cultures and the structures that we build our safeguarding principles on. So safeguarding for us is not just a policy. Okay, what is it? It is the core, it's the proactive action to protect our people, our employees, our communities, and clients. And that's from harm, from abuse, exploitation, and rights. In the GBS context, this matters enormously. We are dealing with large workforces of young people, often on variable contracts, often handling sensitive data, often under pressure. They are pillars that we want them to work from, and these being the three pillars: people, compliance, and culture. People, we want to protect them from harm. Compliance, we want to meet our legal obligations under South African law, which includes POPIA, the basic conditions of employment, as well as the Employment Equity Act, and as you'll later on hear, from the Labor Relations Act as well. The GBS sector has a massive opportunity here. We are large enough to lead. Our clients who are international are watching how we treat our people. So these three pillars are not separate conversations. They're one system. If one breaks, then the others are going to crack as well. So what are the laws that mandate safeguarding? And as you will see in front of you, I want to take you through some of that legal landscape, because in our experience, many GBS organizations treat these as separate compliance boxes to tick, and it's not. The Constitution establishes the right to dignity, equality, and fair labor practice. The Employment Equity Act prohibits unfair discrimination and mandates equitable, safe workplaces. The basic conditions of employment, it sets the minimum standard of work welfare. If your employment contract does not reflect these, you're already non-compliant. In a sector built on data, POPIA is essential. Mishandling information is both a safeguarding failure and a criminal risk. The occupational health and safety is every employer's responsibility and duty, and that is to keep their employees physically as well as psychologically safe. So safeguarding should not just be a policy. It also should be a culture. There are 5 obligations, and each one is backed by statutes, each one auditable, each one a potential liability if it's absent. The one being policy and procedure. And if you don't have them, the first action is very clear. The second one being reporting mechanisms. We've got to understand that employees must be safe and they must be kept from harm, must be protected from victimization. And whistleblowing. I think a lot of us assume that whistleblowing is optional. No, it's not. It is actual law. The third is making sure that we create training and awareness. And under the Employment Equity Act and the Basic Conditions of Employment, we understand that we are required to train our employees. We must also appoint designated confidential persons that are in place, that are available and could be trusted and could be trusted as well. The fourth being investigation and response. The Labor Relations Act, it requires fair procedure, and we are going to hear about it from our next speaker. An untrained manager conducting a shoddy investigation is not just a people problem, it's actually legal exposure. And the last being record keeping. POPIA and the Basic Conditions of Act are very explicit. Incident reports, investigation outcomes must be retained for statutory periods, securely and accurately. And notice that 2, 4, and 5 are all references to the Labor Relations Act. These are not just HR functions in isolation. They are legal functions with legal consequences. So what is the cost of getting it wrong? And I'm going to leave the legal consequences to the next speaker. But from business consequences, it's got reputational damage in the GBS market, where reputation is your product. Client contract loss, many international SLAs now include safeguarding compliance clauses. High staff turnover. Research shows that 35% productivity drop in teams with unresolved workplace conflict and loss of Bapeza standing. So here's the real story. Most of these consequences are triggered by a single safeguarding failure that was either ignored, mishandled, or invisible because there was no reporting channel. So what is it that we recommend in terms of the safeguarding framework? 6 words: prevent, detect, respond, review, empower. So by preventing, you build a culture before you need the policy. Detect, you cannot respond to what you cannot see. So monitoring anonymous reporting lines, incident logging must be compulsory. Respond when something is reported. Act fairly, promptly, and within the individual's well-being. Enforce consistently. The GBS sector is not exempt from discipline, and neither are managers. Accountability must be equal. Review annually your policy. What got revolved, what got reported, what changed, and what is the evidence of your compliance? And lastly, empower. This is where it gets powerful for us. Staff's voice, feedback loops is important because this was built on safeguarding itself. Safeguarding should reflect all of these. Please. Okay, so lastly, what must you do? Starting now, we need to set 3 time frames, 3 sets of actions, all of them achievable, none of them optional. Firstly, immediately audit your safeguarding policy. In the short term and within 30 days, establish a confidential reporting mechanism. Within 90 days, conduct a safeguarding risk assessment, build an incident response procedure, set up your annual review cycle. And I'll leave you with this. Safeguarding is not a department. It is not a policy. It is not a box on an audit checklist. It is a culture. And culture starts with leadership. It starts with every person in this room today. Thank you for your time. I would like to welcome our next speaker. Our next speaker is Grant Wilkinson, an attorney, international accredited mediator, and a facilitator with Global Business Solutions. With extensive experience in labor relations, dispute resolution, and workplace governance, Grant brings a practical and insightful perspective to the evolving employment landscape. Today, he will be sharing with you his expertise on labor law trends, reshaping the BPO sector, exploring the key legislative developments, workplace challenges, and emerging trends that organizations need to understand to remain compliant, competitive, and future ready. Please join me in welcoming Grant Wilkinson. Thank you so much, Grant.
All right, thanks very much for the introduction. I greatly appreciate it. Good morning. Yeah, it's morning still. Good morning, everybody. I'm Grant Wilkinson. I was asked by Professor, let's put something together, put a presentation together for you guys. And my thoughts in putting this presentation together were really around how do we not just present on law? Because I mean, sometimes some of the HR guys in the HR side of the business have seen so many other presentations before, right? But it's to say, well, let's high level unpack strategically what is the labor law or the challenges you face in your space, and then not only looking at it from a trend perspective, which is easy enough to do, but then say, okay, cool, what specifically in my space is impacted, Grant? And number two is what do I do about it? And really, that's the aim of this, is to, I suppose, for two reasons. One, because those who know, I've got a fairly soft spot for the industry. I've been working in the industry since about '08, been helping our clients in the space. And I've seen some of the challenges you've had. You call me when you're in trouble sometimes as businesses, but also, I suppose, also just to keep my brain stimulated is to put something together that's new, that's fresh, etc. So yeah, I hope it adds value. The presentation, it's fresh, it's new, nothing you have seen before if you attended any of Global's presentations. This is me, and the slides, as I told the guys, is when I put a presentation together, I often go through and I work with a certain ring-fenced AI, and then I go, okay, cool, here's my thoughts, help me, play with me, and this is what I want, this is what I like. So all fresh, all new, drawn from all the experience of my own databases, etc. And yeah, I hope it does add enormous value to your operation if you apply it correctly. And I think sometimes that's a big if. A lot of guys attend presentations, have their coffee on the side, put the mic off, catch up on work, have the cameras off, and they aren't invested. It's a short period of time. And I'm going to work fast and furious. So please use the time properly, engage, ask questions, and we learn from each other at the end of the day. Who I am, thanks for the introduction. I am an attorney by trade, labor law specialization since '04. Before that, commercial contracts. So you'd see a lot of my stuff, academic publication, ironically, is not labor law. I'm a contributor author on drugs and alcohol in the workplace, but my academic publication, my only one, is the corporate journal. Because I write stupid, apparently. No, that's because I keep things simple. I come from a big city, Uitenhage, in the Eastern Cape originally, before I became a little bit of a gypsy. And yeah, pretty much I try and keep things simple. And actually, ironically, that corporate report publication was a direct reach out from King himself via Palmy Natterson, who requested to publish my article. So I like to keep things simple, and the reason was because I kept King fairly simple. So tech and change corporate governance. So when I do try and give advice, I try and give it from a practical perspective, a simple perspective, but to make commercial rationale. You can read the law. Mine's to put mechanisms in place to implement it properly and make certain that you become better organizations as a result. So what we're going to cover, ladies and gentlemen, and before you ask the question, yes, you will get a copy of the slideshow. Recording, I don't know. I assume we might, but I'm not too certain. But definitely a copy of the slideshow. I'll happily share it with you. Okay, just for your internal use only, not for external purposes. I know where to find you. Yeah. So from a session overview perspective, what we're going to cover is really to moving away from awareness, where we're going to start. Look, here's a high-level awareness session, to action, looking at the landscape, looking at the risks, and how do you strategically respond in your space in BPOs operating in South Africa. It's a unique space. It's a space with its own unique challenges, and with that, the risks that come with it. That's the reward risk balance you have to find. This will help you to assess where your risks are and to also assess how risk tolerant you need to be in certain areas and how risk intolerant perhaps you need to be and tighten the braces a bit on other areas. Now, what I'll look at is some label or changes that have taken place, and there's more coming. By the end of this year, we're already in 23 June, the year's flown by. But by fourth quarter, probably, you're going to have another run of labor law amendments coming through in the Labor Laws Amendment Act. So keep an eye on that, just giving you a heads up there. There's sector-specific pressure. You have AI, you've got potential of hybrid work, you've got global client demands. All that is putting pressure on you because you want the global work, but by the same token, for instance, in countries such as the United States don't have such stringent labor law hurdles they have to jump over. So your client's coming in with one perspective in the mind. And they come to South Africa and they have a totally different view, right? You have guys who, one of you potentially, I don't know who's all on the call, but one of you potentially was literally about 2-3 years ago. The US client got on a stage, didn't tell the BPO service provider about what they're going to announce, and they announced that they've started their proceedings of closing shop that day. And the BPO service provider heard about it because colleagues in the US told colleagues operating on ground level, do you know about this? And they didn't. And then they went to their team leader and said, have you heard about this? And they didn't. And then obviously it went very quickly to CEO level. And then we had to quickly sort it out from a South African perspective with the procedures followed. And the US guys didn't care, let's be honest. Okay. I'm not suggesting all US clients don't care. We don't take it out of context. I'm saying they are less tolerant of South African labor law. And you have to structure your business very carefully and your contracts carefully when working with clients from different jurisdictions and make certain that when you commercially enter your commercial arrangements, that you take this into account. Too often I find when I look at the commercial service level agreements, when labor disputes arise, and I look at the commercial service level agreements, fine. It's exceptionally one-sided, and I think it's important that you carry across to your clients, your powers that be as well, that we understand you want to sell the business. We understand that you want to do X, Y, and Z, but please bear in mind there are certain things. I'll help you. You now, as an attendee, you'll help your business do so strategically and do so very pro-business. But by the same token, there are laws we have to put in place. Okay, yeah, well, not put in place, but deal with. So what I'll look at as well is risk mitigation strategies and also a little bit of a guess, I suppose, looking at 2027, what might be coming into your space. Okay, and that's really where it's going to come across. Now, before I forget, Naz, I suppose we're gonna blame Natasha, but I forgot to tell you there is a prize for an attendee. Afterwards, you'll have my contact details. Engage with me, and if you have questions, perhaps on session, or if you have questions afterwards based on this, as well, mail me. And as it says, the guys can only qualify if they contact me. So if you don't contact me, if you don't reach out to me in some way or form, you don't qualify for the prize. And that's set the limit there, or the entry point. So just by attending, you don't get access to potential prize. But what we'll do is based on and we'll run it for till close of business today. I'll draw at midnight in case you guys work overtime. And but shortly tomorrow morning, I'll do a random draw, and one person will win a seat to either the Cape Town or Joburg labor law update with Jonathan Goldberg. And here's the thing, though: don't now take a chance as a Joburg and say, "I want to attend the Cape Town update. Can you pay for my travel?" No, it's based on the city you live in. So if you live in Cape Town or if you live in Joburg, there's your seat for you or your colleagues, in to update in those three regions. Okay, so those are the only two regions I'm involved in directly. I head up both arms of Global's business there, so there's only things I can put out. I can't give seats to Durban, etc. Not the region I'm involved in. Right, so Joburg and Cape Town, where most of you are from, please, there is a free seat, random draw based on guys interacting with me afterwards. Even if you just pop an email, Naz didn't cover what you guys need to do, but even if you just pop an email afterwards, I'll put your name in the system, and I'll let the AI randomly draw you. Don't stress. Okay, there'll be no involvement on me, and they won't be pulling things out of a hat. Okay, so that's the prize for one of you who engages with me afterwards between now and midnight. And then we'll you get a free seat to label update. They always ask about, Grant, what's the value? Valued at probably about 3,950 Rand, somewhere around there for the seat, if not more. But the value adds you get coming from that program on Next Level. Those of you who've attended Update with Johnny before know that it's well beyond just that, the value add. He's an amazing speaker, adds enormous value as well to that. Okay. So that's the prize, but you have to mail me afterwards, okay? Now, what you're looking at in your environment is you have a landscape, label or landscape that sort of is just keeping on tightening, tightening, tightening. We're hoping that the labor law amendment process coming through at the end of the year will do a little bit to try and alleviate the pressure. And there are some things coming through the pipeline where it will alleviate the pressure. But other points, for instance, severance pay, you probably guaranteed that it's going to end up at 2 weeks for every completed year of service as of end of this year. So again, when you look at your commercial, bear that in mind. We're looking at what happens when we have to retrench guys. Who bears the cost, how bad, etc. Okay. Now, building to your costing, obviously, as well. Now, you've faced mounting challenges, right? My research shows that CCMA, Labor Court, etc., you guys are coming up. When I say you guys, the industry is coming up in a lot of areas of concerns with regards to governance, right? And it shouldn't be the case. You've got great industry players like the PESA, etc., in your space that provide you with so many advisory checkpoints and so much free advice. I know you guys love free, but so much free advice that it's hard to see how it is that you have a non-compliant situation. I have a few theories around it, but I'll touch on it as we go around that. Okay, don't shoot the messenger though when it comes to my theories. Okay. So important is that your non-compliance issues, it's not just a question of, oh, non-compliance, oh, well, take me to court, take me to the CCMA. With this, there's financial repercussions. There's your community, operational continuity, it plays a role. Your community reputation as an industry player, you know where the guys are fairly dodgy, or not really compliant with the law, right? You're faced with guys, your industry. I'm going to be very careful how I word this. I don't think I can use the word you guys usually use for it. Your industry, you would have worked at one place before, and you find yourself at another place, and you colleagues and become competitors and stuff. There's a hell of a cross-pollination. The word they use, I don't think, is PC, so I won't use the word for it. It starts with INC. You'll figure it out. Okay. Now, a lot of you guys obviously know each other, have worked with each other, have been colleagues before, etc. So understand that your reputation goes before you in industry. People start talking. Right? You've got a lot of guys also besides this who could impact your relationship. Why? Oaks on social media, right? Your guys who are manning your phones sadly think that because AI has empowered them more now, that they suddenly are attorneys, right? I mean, there's one of the players, I don't know if you're on the call, but one of you would know potentially. There's a labor court matter that I helped out one of the clients with because I am a practicing attorney still. And literally, the guy is drafting his own papers. Why? Because he doesn't have enough money to pay for an attorney, thinks he's more intelligent than some of the trade union guys out there. Your oaks always think their attorneys waiting to happen for some reason. And inevitably, on top of that, uh, they want to keep their costs low. So this person has used AI to draft their own labor court papers. Sad thing is, AI is not there yet. You have to have some human oversight. And it's something we're going to talk about now as well, is that AI is great, don't get me wrong, um, as can be seen with this presentation. But by the same token, there has to be some human oversight. You have to go back and correct certain things. Because certain statements AI makes, even though it has full access, that particular AI has full access to my entire database of information. Some of the things I questioned if AI is busy smoking something, right? So please bear this in mind. People will be using AI, they'll be checking and stuff, and let's face it, sensation sells. And there's a lot of pressure in the media houses or on media houses to for their living, basically. So be careful. Cape Town is a very having lived there permanently for 9 years and now flitting between Joburg and Cape Town myself. I lived half my life in Cape Town, half my life in Joburg. Um, Cape Town, it's going to sound strange, but as big as Cape Town is as small as Cape Town is. Everyone knows everyone's business. Growing up in a small town like Uteneg, I understood it because we were very small. But geez, Cape Town in industries, certain industries, right? Yolks like Skinner. So be careful. Not you, but people like Skinner. Skinner is what's the English word for Skinner? No, no, no. My English has left me for a second there, and ironically, I am English.
Gossip.
Gossip. Gossip.
Gossip, that's it.
Yeah.
Cape Town loves gossip and sensation sells. And unfortunately, there is a lot of Schadenfreude. Those of you who are German know what I'm saying. Schadenfreude is a German saying where people take pleasure in another person's failure. There's a lot of Schadenfreude which happens as well in industry. As much as industry uplifts each other, let's be honest with each other. If you can get one up on your competitor politely and your competitor perhaps uses the campaign, you're going, high shame. But by the same token, you're going, more business for me. So yeah, you find yourself in a tight space. Please bear your reputation in mind. Your reputation goes before you. And it's imperative that as organizations, because you trip over each other so much, that you have your ducks in a row. There are no shortcuts. There's efficient ways to apply the law, but there are no shortcuts. Okay. So if we look at the certain developments of the last 2 years, um, these developments that have taken place in the last 2 years, you should have fixed long ago. They're not theoretical risks, they are real obligations. And if you look at enforcement has teeth. You look at Poppy, for instance, the information regulator doesn't mess around. You breach Poppy, you're going to potentially be in jail. All right. There's a potential of a 10% of turnover fine, right? Annual turnover, not net profit after tax. That figure's huge. Okay. So some things that have put pressure in industries, obviously national minimum wage adjustments. And like I've said before, is that everyone wants to pay everybody the most money. But by the same token, there's just so much money to go around. There's no money for you growing in the backyard, right? The national minimum wage figure is increasing quite significantly all the time and guaranteed it's going to increase again next year. Every year it does increase. This year, particularly those of you who follow the national minimum wage trend, it's gone up quite significantly. The challenge with that, as much as most of you are going to tell me, Grant, I don't pay the minimum wage, I pay more than, that's great. But people who are working in your spaces who are getting paid more than minimum wage, look at that and go, well, you know what? If they could give whatever percentage increase it was, and it was above CPI increase this year in 2026, they look at that and they go, well, if government can give that, surely as a corporate, a big bad wolf corporate, right, which we often seen as business role players, you can give more. So don't ignore that adjustment. It does play a role, and you have to deal with people's perceptions there. The other Employment Equity Amendment Act as well, that's proven a big challenge. A few of you guys I'm not saying on the call, but a few of the guys in the industry woke up quite late. I know this because December 17th, I was lecturing in employment equity and putting up employment equity plans and all sorts for a client in your industry in Cape Town. And on day one of the training, unfortunately, I ended up having to rush myself to ICU with a medical issue. Well, I rushed myself to ER and they chunked me into ICU for 11 days. But the reason we were training on December 17th and 18th, I think it was supposed to be, right, was because for some reason the predecessor who said they have everything under control had not. And unfortunately, when they were coming to the end of the year, just making sure everything's in order for next year and stuff like that, Jan, there was nothing in place. There was just smoke and mirrors. And my question to organizations is, you're so good at checking in people's hours, time, SOP deliveries, all sorts. What are you doing to do the same from your labor compliance perspective? You've got the systems, make it work for you. Try and get a system, try and use AI. I'm not suggesting people, because algorithms have their own challenge, but I'm not suggesting use AI only, but human delivered AI or human led AI in terms of performance management, in terms of compliance sort of time frame, so it doesn't slip through the radar because time flies by very quickly in your space. That's important. You have pressure from a deeming provision. When I say that, I'm sort of talking about fixed term contracts, not 198 necessarily, the TES space, right? But ironically, over the last 6 to 12 months, for no reason that I can logically figure out, other than membership drives and money, there's been probably in the last 6 to 12 months, easily 5 cases where I've been directly involved where a Section 198 deeming case has come through on interpretation application of deeming. I was involved in the 2018 and or 2009 till 2015 labor law amendment process. I was blessed. I was lucky enough to be asked to assist and represent Brewster and Capes in Parliament. While Johnny was at NEDLAC, just to have levels of engagement. And I must be honest with you, I'm shocked that deeming 198 is coming through, but it is. 5 disputes in the last 6 months where I'm directly involved with, not just cases that have been referred, is huge. So you've got to make certain your arrangements, your contracting, etc., is properly dealt with. There's going to be a big push in terms of your gig workers, your Uber drivers. There's going to be changes coming into that space. And if you are using independent contractors, there's going to be pressure from you in that perspective. So there's a lot that you have to keep an eye on, and perhaps not in the terms of direct impact per se, but the indirect unintended consequences sometimes are what you have to look at as well, or the parallel impact as well. So deeming provision is a big thing. You're constantly on fixed term contracts, and sadly, still after all these years, people are using monthly contracts or 3 month contracts or whatever. Whereas perhaps when you hire people, it should be based on project based or campaign based contracts more than anything else. And you have to contract properly. You have to look at the commercials, and this is where the ball's dropped in my view, is that the negotiations are done at a particular level with certain people, and then the implementation of what these people at negotiation level have agreed upon is done by these guys here in a different space, and they implement the contract, and they just get told, well, we need this contract, etc. Meantime, back at the ranch, if you look at the commercials, the incorrect employment contract that gets given out, or the employment arrangement is not linked to that. And we need to close the gap and make certain that we have a seamless engagement from a commercial perspective, governance perspective, and labor law perspective. Okay, especially in your fast-moving industry, you're getting a lot of good publicity, you're doing a lot of good work, and sadly, when you do a lot of good work, your risk often, sadly, is that someone's going to be irritated by that and is going to want to take you down. All right? It's humanity's curse, isn't it? When you see someone successful, sometimes people just want to drag you down. So realize that taking a big player like your industry, big players in job creation, which you are, right? And being able to have somebody, a new entrant to the business, make a name for themselves by taking you down could be problematic, right? So be careful, have your provisions in order, get your contracts right, right? Now, the deeming provision, obviously, with a fixed term contract basis is, please don't forget, after 3 months, on a fixed term contract, direct employment, not TES, right? If you have the person on a 3 month contract, they are deemed permanent after the third month and below the threshold figure. That threshold figure keeps going up, right? But after 3 months, are deemed permanent employees of yourself. Whether that's fixed term contract, not even TES. Obviously, TES is a deemed labor broker, also for purpose of labor relations that takes place. But after using a direct line contract for 3 months, you got to explain why these guys are on a contract. And I'm not convinced that a lot of the guys, when they give employment contracts, are very specific in terms of how they contract. And I think we just have to be careful. Stop just copy and pasting contracts. It's the bane of my existence where I see on these WhatsApp groups. Does someone have an example of, and it's a very specific policy document or very specific procedure? There's a shiver down my spine. There are certain things where you can base sort of a template and then customize it for yourself. But geez, the stuff I've seen some people in HR groups ask is horrendous. So be very careful. Don't copy paste things. Okay. There's tightening of the rules around TES. Obviously, we've seen that already for the last, 8, 9 years. But understand that they're going to try and find a way and keep an eye on this contract properly to properly look at are you using contracts correctly when engaging either fixed term contract yourself directly or your TESs. Always bear in mind you've got to read section 200A, and you can go through the slides. I'm not going to read slides to you adults. But you can look at section 200A, and if you're using TES, you look at section 200A together, section 198, and look at that in terms of how it interacts. Are these guys really contractors or are these guys really TES employees? Is it really temporary work? Am I contracting properly? Please make certain you do contract properly. Because if you look at the CCMA stats, and obviously I've pulled from some of the PESA reports as well, you are disproportionately, as BPO sectors, represented in unfair dismissal cases, unfair labor practice cases, and sometimes deeming disputes. So where things have gone wrong in your space is inadequate warnings, inconsistent discipline is a big issue. I find in your industry, depending who's there and their experience, etc., they're going to dish out different sanctions. Please tighten the screws there. If you are in the HR department of your business, make certain to nail down consistent applications. Okay. The pre-dismissal processes aren't followed, often or not properly followed. They're rushed through. Poorly documented performance management processes, if any. When I say performance management process, proper, not just have a cup of coffee, and let's just chat about the proper performance management processes. Where you have retrenchment processes where it's not done properly is a big issue as well, where you skip prior consultation or there's a lack of engagement on this. And often what I find, and it's an observation I made, is that sometimes people try and be crafty with contracts, which is important. You have to be very specific about your contract and the details in your contract. But there's a difference between crafty in a positive way and crafty in a, what's the word? A non-compliant way, right? And usually, and I can't emphasize this enough, it doesn't matter what your contract says. If your contract is contrary to the law always takes preference and gets read into your contract as if the law is in there. So please be careful when you get asked by your clients from other jurisdictions potentially, look, I want this, I want that, I want that. Push back, where obviously there's different ways of pushing back, and that's up to the professional negotiators to push back on this. But it's important that you do push back on these so that there are early doors. You manage that argument because let's face it, like most things, it's nice and easy when you guys like each other and you're trying to get into a relationship with each other. But where the rubber hits the road and you have problems with each other, that's when you're not able to negotiate properly. That's where people get a lot harder in terms of how they want to deal with the contracts and the cancellation of the contract, etc. Now, important is that look at where your industry goes wrong when it comes to this, but do a self-reflection on this. And I think it's important to understand one of my views, perhaps that you might not like, is I think you get put under a lot of pressure as businesses in your space because it's high pace, it's high volume, every minute matters, which is great, high performance. I think sometimes people get stuck in a little bit of I call it a divorce machine, a sausage machine. We just you're so busy, your head's spinning, you're not getting time to do things properly. You're so focused on deliverables that you focus on you're missing the point of let's get good processes in place that makes it easier for us to do the processes so that we can justify still working super efficiently, but through following process. But I don't think a number of businesses really do a proper audit of their own businesses. Um, and I think it's quite sad that you don't take the time just to do that audit to make your life a little bit easier and make you deliver faster in the long run. Now, one of the other changes is the Employment Equity Act. You've seen it, you've heard about it. We dealt with it last year, so I'm not going to bore you with this in the presentation, but we know that now from your perspective, there are, as BPO, there are sectoral targets for any business in South Africa. But in your space, you've got your own sectoral targets. At the end of 5 years, 2030, you must achieve those targets. If you don't achieve those targets, do you have any of one of the seven good reasons why you didn't achieve the target? But the only way you achieve employment equity is by making it make commercial sense to you and your business. So you know the rules around this, dealt with last year, but know the rules around the equity space. Realize that if you don't achieve your target, if you are found guilty of discrimination, I'm finding an increase of discrimination cases in your space as well. I'm not suggesting correctly referred, but these guys are just Googling an AI and they go, oh, well, it's discrimination. And then they're claiming discrimination cases. I find, particularly in Cape Town, but also in Johannesburg, I find a significant increase in discrimination case referrals. But cross your eyes, dot your I's and cross your T's, because if you are found guilty of discrimination, right, you don't get an employment equity compliance certificate. You don't get an employment equity compliance certificate. There's an impact on a BE scorecard. You can't do business with government. Um, you can't get tenders. Now, you can't tell me that in the back of your mind, those of you who are involved in negotiating some industry perks, I suppose you want to call it that, aren't thinking, rightfully so, that, hey, Grant, maybe this is going to affect us in terms of certain grants we get or certain rebates we might get. Yeah, I suspect at some stage it's going to get to that point. Do I know that it's going to get to that point? No. Do I suspect it is? Sure. And I think as business leaders, you have to understand that this poses a significant risk to your business if you don't do this properly. Okay. You've got sector targets. I know two organizations in Cape Town in your industry who were audited by the Department of Employment and Labour last year. Inspectors came to audit their business. And one of them, because the inspector didn't understand the business, right, and didn't understand the business case, said that the progress they feel or the planning is too conservative, not understanding the space you find yourself in. So always bear that in mind. You need to tell the story of what your business is and what your business structure is and the planning is. Tell it properly. You are, in your explanation to the Department of Employment and Labour, have to clearly set out what your plan is for the next 5 years, how you're going to get there, and why is it that it's not perhaps where the department might want it. Okay. Bear in mind as well, fines for non-compliance, ladies and gentlemen, range first offence 2% of annual turnover, all the way up to 10% of turnover. It's a huge risk for businesses. And also, I think publicity is bad because referrals from the Department of Labour inspectors, if they find you, not referrals, but if they find you non-compliant, you don't comply with compliance orders, etc., they go to Labour Court. Labour Court becomes public record, right? DCMA, it's technically public record, but not as much as Labour Court. And public record means those of you who are involved, there's a particular retailer in Cape Town. Don't mention their name. I'm not mentioning their name on purpose. They're going through a bit now. But there's a particular retailer in Cape Town who, when I can move to Cape Town, I was trying to chat to them, seeing if we can assist them. And they said, no, we've got everything in order. And I find it quite ironic because that retailer, in most cases at Labour Court, probably was very disproportionately taken to CCMA, Labour Court, etc. And created the perception in my mind at the very least, and I know a lot of you guys probably as well, that maybe perhaps you haven't got everything in order. Okay. So understand if that's an absolute outsider from the Eastern Cape originally coming into a city and picking up that this particular retail has a big, big problem, not me only, yeah? So be careful, manage your reputation properly. Realize, yes, there's going to be cases where people refer it unnecessarily, but you can back those. But where people get a constant referral against you, then it points to problems, right? Now, you also have BE into play that's applicable to your space. And obviously, BE labor compliance are they are intertwined. Look at the Employment Equity Act, and the big push is that employment equity. If you don't get a certificate for the reasons I stated in the previous slide, it might impact the management part or the arm of your BE scorecard. There are stakeholders involved in the discussions who are pushing, and I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen, but there are parties who say, well, maybe you should get 0 on your management scorecard. That knocks off what, 20, 25 points on your scorecard, yeah? 20 points on your scorecard. Right? You start with 80 points out of 100 straight away. Be very careful. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. Please don't say Grant said this, Grant. I'm not saying this. I'm saying there's people in spaces asking the question, right? And some stakeholders are asking the question. So please make certain you get employment equity right, okay? Because if you don't get it right, there's low E scorecard. Low E scorecard means a BE downgrade. BE downgrade means loss of client eligibility. And then reduced client base means you get a reduced impact. It's a butterfly effect and a very negative one at that if you don't get this right. Okay. Don't just say it's a labor law issue or employment equity issue. It's not something important to business. It's very important to your business. Post-pandemic health and safety, obviously, the regulations and how they view it has shifted. You have certain businesses who have hybrid arrangements in your space. Courts are becoming very strict on this issue. There is remote work liability, and important is the courts are looking at workplaces and saying, well, you've got this health and safety risk at play. What you allowing people to work from home potentially or hybrid, some days home, some days there. What are you doing to make certain their workplaces are safe? On that point on workplace safety and having covered employment equity, your businesses, your industry is a huge risk of let me answer the question. What do you think is a big risk area? I'm in the I'm in discrimination section and employment equity section. I'm in workplace health and safety. And your liability as an employer to make certain that you've got a safe working environment. What's your big risk? Start with an H in your sector, in my view. I gave it away earlier by mistake. Harassment. No one's answering the question again. I don't want to say it, Grant. Right? Harassment is a huge risk issue in your workplace. Have you done a harassment risk assessment as required by the relevant harassment regulations? Have you done the harassment risk assessment? If you haven't, you're non-compliant with law already, right? But what are we doing to make certain that mental health is addressed? Because there are in your space, in Cape Town, I'm finding a significant increase, and it might be my perception. Industry players can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm picking up a lot of allegations. And I'm saying allegations because I don't want to say it's fact of an increase in mental health referrals, where people are saying that the work environment's impacting them and they're not well enough to work. I'm picking it up more regularly, right? It's always been something that pops up in your space, but I'm picking up an increased trend, my perception, right? Obviously, load shedding not an issue at the moment, but there are rumors doing the rounds, aren't there? Right, so you must certain that your business is functional and working properly. Okay. Any questions at this stage before I move to the next section? Obviously, it's fast and furious. It's one presentation, but any questions or comments or anything so far? I can't see anything, so I haven't worked on Zoom for the longest time. Everything's moved to Teams nowadays.
So, Grant,
Natasha.
there's a question from Derek. Derek,
Yeah.
if you're happy to go off mute to elaborate your question, please do.
Yes,
Talk to me, Derek.
Grant, hi, it's Derek. I asked the question about when you were looking at, when you were commenting about fixed term contracts a bit earlier, you're not saying, or you're not implying that we mustn't use them. You're just saying use them
No.
wisely, particularly when it comes to seasonal contracts for peaks and troughs and all of that. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, I'm saying that use it properly, and I think that's where the disconnect is often I find is that the guys who are negotiating the commercials in the contracting portion,
Yeah,
there's a drop of the ball somehow between them and the guys drafting the employment contracts. And I think it's just important. We need to make certain that there's a meeting of the minds there,
got it.
where the guys who are given the contracts are given the correct contracts. Be it seasonal contracts, because fixed term contracts is a broad term. Because
Yes.
fixed term contracts can mean limited duration, which a lot of people call fixed term, especially limited duration contracts. But under fixed term contracts, there's like 11 different types of fixed term contracts you can give somebody. But it's about contracting correctly, Derek. I think that's appropriate. But no doubt, there's in your space clear need for fixed term contracts. I battle to see, unless it's a continuous situation, I battle to see a lot of possibilities of permanent contract in certain positions.
Got it.
I think you contracting incorrectly by giving them permanent contracts. There's some
Got it.
positions which will always be fixed term contracts, perhaps linked to a campaign or something like that. If you're uncertain how long the campaign's going to last, but the guy might pull the plug tomorrow,
Yeah.
then I'm
Yeah.
linking it to the Eaton campaign. So I'm seeing your
Got it.
surname, the Eaton
Okay.
campaign, and whether the Eaton campaign closes in 2 weeks' time or closes in 2 years' time, it doesn't matter. Your contract's
Yeah.
linked to
To
that.
that.
And I
Got it.
understand strategically you battle to find talent sometimes, and you can't make certain promises if you put that out. But be very clear that a permanent contract doesn't always equate to getting the best talent.
Yeah.
I'm not sold by that, to be
Yeah.
honest
Got
with
it.
you.
Thanks, Grant.
Some people
Thank
like to
you.
control their life better. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we look at your pressures in your space, you navigate structural shifts continuously. How work is performed is literally your client wakes up one day and says, "Well, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z, make it happen." You guys have to jump and somehow make it happen. And as I said, I've got a lot of respect for this industry because one, it creates a hell of a lot of employment in South Africa. Please don't forget that you are that job creator in South Africa. Wear it as pride. Don't let people shoot you down, right? You're not a stepping stone, career-wise. There's a lot of people that have been in industry. Even I joined Global 2008, and that's when I worked more regularly with industry. I was an employer rep before that, but with this industry in 2008. And I've seen some of you come from, what could be termed perhaps entry-level positions, or supervisory positions. And now you are some of the top players in the industry. You guys have grown so much. So don't tell me it's a short-term job, it's a stepping stone job. This is something which can become a career. Some of the best HR practitioners are in your industry, let's be honest, as well. So it's about managing that perception and molding that. Okay, and I think it's just about properly dealing with those perceptions. Because remember, it might be perception from the employee's part or somebody managing their perception incorrectly, perhaps educating their perception incorrectly with a purpose, obviously. But that's that person's reality, even if it's perception. So why don't we grab the bull by the horns, I suppose the saying is, and we drive our message, we drive our story, and I think too often uh, we do grab it and we do drive it, but not as hard, I think, as we could. You guys could be a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking at? Perhaps not brash. I've got all these non-PC words coming in my mind. I don't know some of the audience, so I don't want to get the non-PC words out. But you've really got to strut because you own the space. And I think it's important that you do that. You creating employment, people want to work for you. It's not like, you wear the big boy pants in this, or the big lady pants in this conversation, and own it. I think that's important. So you're navigating all these changes, and you've got the whole issue around your clients having their own perceptions and demands in terms of what they want of your business as well. AI is something that's going to come through big time in your space. Um, and there's two ways AI can go. I'm of the firm view, and it's something that Johnny often says, is that AI is not going to take a job. It's the guy who can use AI the best that's going to take a job. And I think it's about upskilling and And give the guys credit. There's a lot of good trainings out there where you're upskilling guys to use AI properly. And I think once we reshape, look at the roles and look at how does it need to reshape in the new modern world? How do we create employment in the space where AI is playing a big role? I don't like it when I get a phone call from a call center and it rings and then it's quiet. And then suddenly I say hi, and then you say hi. The machine says hi. And then suddenly it starts spewing out this marketing material at me. I despise that. So is AI going to take everybody's job? No. The question is, how are we going to engage AI to make ourselves more efficient? And how do we use this as a proper delivery tool where we can not let the algorithm control what we do, but how can we optimize ourselves with working with AI? Okay. So important is though, be careful. You use AI often to do assessments of your organizations, look at whether the headcount's at the right level, etc. Be careful, check the AI, always have the human oversight of your stats. Because when you go to court, let's assume job displacement happens as a result of AI analysis, right? So you have AI doing analysis. This says we don't need this many people, and you trigger a retrenchment process based on AI's assessment. Are you able, as the human being in the room with the commissioner or a labor court in front of a judge, are you able to properly justify your rationale? Because our courts historically haven't been keen on being involved in assessing your rationale. Because they say we're not in your business, we don't understand your business, we're not there to make a judgment call on whether you made the right decision. We look at process more. That's gone. For the last probably 2 years, the trend has been, and it's even more so this year, I find, the trend has been for the courts and the CISMA to really unpack your reasoning or your rationale. There's some commissioners and facilitations with some of you guys and that you shared with me, where commissioners have said, I'm not sold on your reasoning. I'm not sold on your rationale. I don't think your rationale for your retrenchment is sound, right? And your rationale, unfortunately, you don't ask your client why, you just jump and say, I'm going to retrench. Your rationale is, oh, but no, but the clients in the US there or the UK or wherever, they say we need to retrench. The commissioner's saying, why? No, we're just following instructions. That's not good enough reason, right? Really use your AI properly when you look at your rationale. Get your client, if you engage with clients made a decision, to unpack the reasoning properly. Not to the extent that you can irritate the client and the client's going to get rid of you totally, but to be able to justify it in the courts once it gets there, because they will like you a far lot less if their name goes out in the court system. Yeah. There's going to be a skills transition. I think industry needs to play a big role in this, and you've got a lot of guys looking into this. And again, I'm more than happy to share my contact. And when I say that, I don't often give you cell numbers necessarily, but reach out to the right people, connect to the right people. We're blessed, we're lucky. My direct report, Johnny Goldberg, he's the labor market convener at NEDLAC for Business in East Africa. And with that comes in itself a lot of connections as well. So as industry, look into this. There's some great work being done by industry. For instance, Jack, for instance, done amazing work recently on getting approval on another plan where I think the guys pay very little, if anything, and yet you get these guys getting put through high level training, connected with institutions, fully accredited, and you train them up. And in that program, as an example, you had myself as probably the most entry lecturer there. And I'm all right. I'm not that entry, but I was the most entry person in my view there. So your ability to tap into these networks is crucial. So use that to upskill properly, do a proper analysis, and industry plays a big role. And if you are a company in the industry and perhaps you haven't got contacts in the industry, please reach out to Naz and team. They'll direct you to the right guy to talk to. And there's a lot of guys I saw, Fran, I saw your name over there as well. Yeah, phenomenal industry players, people who do a lot of good work in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. So please use those appropriately. Be careful. One of the other challenges in the face, as I said, algorithmic management. When you're monitoring performance, etc., be careful. It's great when you put a performance management in place with AI, etc. but make certain that there's a human oversight to it as well. Otherwise, you could have a situation of unconscious bias from the AI's perspective now. As human beings, we are being trained on our unconscious biases. As AI doesn't care about its bias, let's be honest. Okay. I spoke about the AI retention trap. I won't go through that more, but be careful when you utilize new technology. Make certain that when you're unpacking your reasoning, you could clearly give those reasoning, and inevitably, your aim with the retrenchment process, important, is to save jobs. That's the mindset you go into, because you have to also show you've done everything to avoid the retrenchments. Yes. Hybrid work, it is something that comes up in remote work, not as often, I suppose, in your space as in the regular workplaces. When I say regular, your stock standard office bound or blue collar jobs. But there are places where the guys are allowed remote models. Make certain you get this place down pat. Consider things like your working time and overtime, because let's face it, working hours, travel time, overtime, etc., play a big role. You must make fair processes if it's done remotely. Make certain there's proper connection with the processes. You've got privacy challenges if some guys are working remotely as well. The equipment costs, data costs, and all sorts. So a lot to take into account if you do eventually decide to go to a remote work model if you are not there already. But the other challenges is inevitably working hours. Because let's face it, most times because of the guys working US or UK hours, the shifts often run the risk of, I'm not saying they often do, I said often they run the risk of having breaches of overtime agreements. But you've got to make certain that there are proper overtime agreements in place. Whilst there is, if you're having late night shifts, is there transport in the area, as an example? Where you regularly working between 11 and 6, the acts are quite clear that you have to make certain that you do proper health and safety assessment. Are you doing that, etc.? Look at your schedules, etc., because your big risk area is this overtime. They're starting to crack down quite heavily on hours of work. Obviously, now with you doing work all over the world, which is great, there are different standards at play, and this is where SLA plays a fundamental role here. Usually, it's a nice thing. You got to work, we like each other and stuff. And then usually the clients tell you, I don't care what you want in the contract, this is what we're going to give you. If you're not going to do that, then we're going to go to somebody else. I think because it's an agreement, because it's a relationship, it's a two-way street, isn't it? And I think as commercially, you've got to decide where you're going to push back and what is it that you're going to have as a walkaway point in your negotiation, right? Because in the basic negotiation, you have your best alternative to negotiate agreement, your BATNers, and then you have your walkaway points, right? And at some point in your commercial negotiation, you have to walk away from certain commercial transactions. So please, if you are involved with the decision making and you are involved with the corporate and governance side of things or the labor compliance side of things, make certain that the teams who are negotiating the commercials are aware of what they need to take into account and what they can push back on, etc. Okay. I would really recommend a labor audit in your MSA. Sorry, in your master service agreement, MSA. I know sometimes people say mutual separation agreement. Now I'm talking about the master service agreement. Where you have a master service agreement, I would suggest that you do in there build in annual third-party labor practice audits, where you get a neutral third-party team coming to just make certain everything's kosher. Right? Where there's non-compliance areas, that non-compliance can trigger both ways your contract termination clauses. Right? Because inevitably you're stuck in a situation sometimes. I mean, you could have a situation where you pull the plug on the client because the client's not paying you, right? What are you going to put in your rationale for your retrenchment? Okay. All these things play a big role, right? You need to do a supply chain due diligence, because wherever the parties are you're servicing, they've got their own laws which might be applicable on transaction as well. Are you doing that supply chain due diligence, especially with Poppy? Which law is applicable? Is it Poppy, or if you're servicing the European Union area, is GDPR applicable? And often GDPR is applicable. But have you got your guys in place with that? Right? Because your flow of information from a POPI perspective is between different jurisdictions, you've got to make certain that there's proper guidelines in terms of POPI, GDPR, and all information regulation as well. Yeah. And this is where your compliance gaps exist. Your operator agreements, often I find you don't have operator agreements in place. Because you're processing people's data, you've got to document that process very clearly, especially if it's jurisdiction cross-border, jurisdictional sharing of information, and inevitably security breaches. If there are security breaches, which I'm sure there would be, inevitably, in your space, a big risk of this. What processes are in place that the guys know if there is a breach of security, where to from here? Do you have the proper process? You need to tie it down quite quickly, especially in your space where we're dealing with a lot of, let's say, I know there's some businesses who service, for instance, utilities. You've got all Grant's personal information. You've got some Grant Wilkinson sitting in the UK, and you've got all his information about his utilities, right? If that goes missing or get in the wrong hands, etc., what then? Which laws are applicable? All those type of things come into play. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on load shedding. It is there in the background. There are threats of that. Just make certain you still got your things in order. I find similar like when COVID, even though the regulations are still applicable, a lot of the regulations, some of the checks and balances you had during COVID times now suddenly don't exist, or are not properly enforced. Be careful. Always have your backup plan in place in the event, touch wood, I'm not suggesting it's going to happen, but in the event that load shedding happens, that you've got a backup plan. Okay. In your environment, for me, as one of the big things I've picked up is mental health and psychosocial risk. It's obviously a high pressure environment. It's not nice conversations some of these guys have to have with clients on the phone. There's targets. You often have repetitive tasks, and that's always shown where you have repetitive tasks that has a mental impact on people, right? They have difficult clients they're dealing with, and often this is not at hours you ordinarily be awake, especially servicing, as an example, the US market, right? Now, there's certain legal obligations you have as a business, but also certain, let's face it, moral obligations you have, right? And let's face it, your government institutions are taking this a lot more seriously, right? Supervision quality, how to deal with interpersonal conflict. Are we training managers up how to deal with these things properly? Are we training, giving our team leaders a platform where they can raise issues correctly with an employee, not just crack hard at them? If they were previously on the ground level and they've moved up to a team leader position, have you given them leadership training of sorts to be ready for that position? Because they were friends with this guy last week, yeah? Now they're his boss, not boss, but direct report. It brings about its own challenges. And in your industry, for instance, when the guy or person progresses into the team leader position, what are we doing to make certain that we don't have challenges of harassment in the workplace? Because for some reason, in your workplace, as soon as guys progress, and often the team leaders are roughly what age do you think? Most times, late 20s, mid 30s, right? And this is where the potential of harassment occurs because the guys that report into them are often early 20s, yes? And what are we doing to make certain we're dealing with putting good processes in place, prevent that type of happening, training people up about what harassment is, etc. Okay, there are some baselines in place. Luckily, you've got good assistant EAPs in place, but please make certain there's been a significant increase of duty of care compliance referrals to the CCMA and other platforms. And I say platforms because there was one operator in Cape Town where, these influencers, right? They jumped online and they did a video spewing absolute nonsense. One or two might have had some legs, but mostly nonsense. And tagging the influencer, and the influencer tries to jump into the workplace issue. Make certain we keep our noses clean. Make certain we cover the channels around this. Make certain that you can't cover everything, but put as many processes in place as possible. make certain that we have got good processes in place around incapacity and misconduct. So absenteeism because of mental health issues, right? I'm just saying that because a lot of times in the cases I've dealt with in your industry, half the time it's got nothing to do with the work. Someone just wants to be boarded, right? Or someone just wants to be absent frequently, and then use the illness as an excuse. And let's face it, mental health, mental illness is a big problem. I'm not talking that down at all, but unfortunately, it is subject to abuse. But make certain that you train your guys up to properly distinguish between is this an incapacity I'm dealing with, or is this a misconduct we're actually dealing with it? Because if you don't classify it correctly and you follow the wrong path, even if you follow that path 100% legally, it could be that you find yourself in a situation where it's procedurally unfair with 12-month compensation. So make certain the guys are trained properly. Okay. Any questions on that portion? I'm going to come with strategy now for the last bit. I can't see the chat box, so.
Yeah, no questions in the chat. Thanks, Grant.
All right. So if you're looking at some risk mitigation, okay, I think the important thing first is awareness of risk. Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, but now you know there's no excuses, right? What we're going to look at in the next portion is looking at how do we reduce that risk and how do you put compliance into our strategies whilst maintaining effective, efficient money-making businesses. Because you're not there as a charity, most of you, right? Most of you are here because you're running a business, you want to make money, right? So what we look at is saying, take the compliance arm of it, but look at how do we embrace into enforce it into our strategies, right? Because once you get the strategy right and you put it as part, once you get your compliance right as part of your business strategy, that's the sweet spot. Because if you're just complying for the sake of complying, number one, you're not going to comply. Number two is that unfortunately, you are going to miss a beat of opportunities from a business perspective. Right? I often use with my employment equity lectures, I refer to the GM model for employment equity, where General Motors had a challenge of attracting the right talent of certain gender and race. And with that challenge, they strategically looked at the business, looked for the business opportunities that this challenge brings with it. And they put such a great model in place, which just made them so much money, but on top of that, attracted the best talent, etc. But it's about strategically, how do we make this work for us? We have these compliance things, but how do we make this compliance issue actually part of our strategy and proactively put this in place so we get the right people in the right places and deliver, but also attract the talent. The people can see who you are. They know it's a good business to work with, the compliant business. Let's go there. Okay. Now, where you slip up sometimes as businesses is, like I said, the divorce machine, where you're so busy, you don't have time to properly performance manage people, you don't have time for the formal hearing processes, etc. Now, I think what's simple is keeping it consistent and document your stuff. Right? You don't have a lot of time on your hands operationally. You're on a tight schedule, which means that you have to get the baseline right. You get the baseline right, the system will take care of itself then, yes. With a little hands-on and consistent application, you're good. But too often we get caught up in how busy we are, and then these issues drop down, or we don't want to take action for whatever reason, right? I think importantly, from a discipline perspective, get a clear disciplinary code. Train your line managers, right? Because line managers must understand what's the procedural fairness and what it is that you can do as line managers. I created a training program actually called Line Managers, and one of your industry players did it with me, the session with me, where literally we spoke them through not only labor relations, practical hands-on labor relations issues, but also stuff like EQ, right? Stuff like conflict management, um, harassment in the workplace. But what are we doing to train managers? Um, and are we doing it regularly now? I'm not suggesting you do it, every 6 months, every year. I'm not suggesting that at all, right? But get proper people in place to properly train you. Get it done right once, so that you don't have to get the guys in all the time. Get it done once, and then have follow through into the system, right? When you have hearings, document your hearings properly, make certain your outcomes follow reasonable grounds and decision making. That's what they're going to look at with the code of good practice that we dealt with last year is reasonable decision making, right? And then consistency, consistency, consistency. Where people lose cases, a lot of times with inconsistency. You want to be the nice guy, or this is a great worker and they just messed up from a misconduct perspective. It's choice and consequence, isn't it? Right? People are wired to check for inconsistency, for checking for fairness. That's how human beings are wired. Please make certain you consistently apply your discipline. Retrenchment readiness, where your non-negotiables for your retrenchment inevitably is issuing a notice properly. As soon as there's a inkling, I suppose is a neutral word for it, that there's a need for retrenchment, you need to issue the 1893 notice out. You have to allow time for meaningful consultation. And I added this point after the hyphen out based on some of my experience of how some industry players have done this. Some industry players have done presentations basically. It's information sharing. That's not consultation. Eventually, when the relevant fora, CCMA, Labour Court, etc., start delving into this, which they are going to even more now, they're going to start going, but listen, this isn't enough. You're just telling them what's happening. You're not really listening to alternatives. You're not really putting out the real rationale in great detail. You're just saying, client cancel the contract, whatever. Okay, so please be looking at this. Genuinely consider alternatives. Your last port of call is a retrenchment, right? It shouldn't be an easy thing where I don't want to be retrenching, right? Look at these other alternatives short of retrenchment. Make certain you can justify and document your selection criteria. If it's not the whole place shutting down, how are we going to select the business and the guys in the system? Because too often I find people go, well, I don't want grant there. Is there a way we can find a way to classify as selection criteria to get grant out? That's not the way to go about it. It must be properly justifiable. And what's become most acceptable, even more now in recent times, is last in, first out. Skills, they still could look at to a degree, but the courts are frowning upon it quite recently. Be very careful with that. Work out your severance pay, bearing in mind, by the end of this year, that's going to be up to 2 weeks for every completed year of service, probably. All indications are that's where it's going to land. The trade union representation at NEDLAC were pushing for 3. They still, as business, going to push for 1 week for every year service because retrenchments aren't easy. You don't have a lot of money when you're retrenching. Unfortunately, it does appear it's going to land at about 2 weeks, the information we have. So brace yourself and get ready for that. Put proper structures in place for that. Make certain you contract properly. I've dealt with this already with the earlier slides. I won't unpack it too much, but make certain that you do a classification audit of your contracts to make sure you're contracting people properly. If there are contractors and not employees, is it really the case? Does the contract reflect that? If you're using a fixed term contract, is the correct fixed term contract I'm using? Is it seasonal? Is it linked to a particular campaign? Is it a true limited duration contract? So you need to do a proper assessment of your contract and do your assessment versus 200A. And if you're using a TES, also 198A. Make certain your contracts are generally correctly drafted. Don't just copy and paste contracts. And contracts drafted in other countries may not necessarily be applicable or legally or legally appropriate in our jurisdiction. So don't just copy and paste contracts. And please stop posting on WhatsApp groups. Does anyone have the following template contract? I will kill you. No, I'm joking. I will be grumpy in the background. Okay. Monitor it consistently though. Look at the more you have your contractual relationship, put AI in place to assist you with it. The last thing you need is a contract ending and you having the guy on your book still, because then the person is a permanent worker, right? But important is if you pick up there's a problem, if you pick up we've contracted the people incorrectly, why don't you proactively deal with it rather than waiting for a dispute to go to the CCMA or Labour Court or Department of Labour referral? Why don't you deal with it yourself? Why don't you fix the contracts yourself? All right. And there's lots of guys that can assist you. I know my colleague Laura Thomas. She is in our Cape Town office permanently, and she wants to be in Cape Town permanently. She has moved from our East London branch. See, Laura's online, a good saxophonist as well. as a separate side gig, or her passion in both. She's got two passions: labor law one, and her artistry, her saxophony. I don't know if I'm saying it properly, Laura. Is the other. She does great jobs in both, and you've got access to us. So you've got guys like Laura in Cape Town, me, Cape Town, and Joburg, the whole network of people. Why not use it, right? Have people come in and do audits of your system, right? Make certain though that when you're looking from an employment equity perspective, right? Also, again, lots of guys that can assist in that regard. Why don't you look at stuff like succession planning, um, profile development, targeted profile development? I'm running out of time, I know that's why I'm speeding up a bit. But why don't we look at that? And if it is that we have remote work, why don't we formalize the arrangements? Why don't we look at POP compliance, right? If you're going to use AI, just in closing, is I think it's important that we be careful when you implement AI, that there's proper transparency, always have human oversight. Don't let AI run it itself. AI's got its own challenges, yes. Do bias audits, right? Because inevitably, there was, I can't remember where it was. I read an article once where it ended up showing that the AI itself had created in its algorithm a bias against a particular type of candidate. So be very cautious that we not just purely relying on AI, have your oversight, but working with AI. Make certain you have copy compliance as well. Please be careful with that. Make sure you process information lawfully. Make certain that the AI you are using has its own little bucket. What information declassify before putting it into the AI, as an example. Important though is how do we get your resilience, right? Because the moment you're legally robust, the system's already in place. You have that baseline, right? And we're building on that base. Usually that results in workforce resilience. It's an environment where employees are engaged, they're informed, and they're equipped to perform, right? Not just ask them to perform, but actually equip them properly. Okay. Important though, it's not being altruistic. It's actually, from a risk perspective, an important risk management process, right? Because statistically, engaged workforces litigate less. Let's be real. Skills investment is important. At the moment I train people up, chances
I know
are.
I'm phoning and phoning and phoning, but I had to let you know that I got the invite this morning.
So I'm just going to mute Fran. And communication reduces conflict. Too often in businesses, especially in your fast-paced environment, where there's a lack of communication, conflicts arise, right? Briefly, does trade unions in your business prepare yourself? I've given you some tips there from strategic best practice perspective. Training your managers how to properly engage with unions and important to, once you have shop stewards in the workplace, to build your relationships. For me, though, it is do your legal risk audit. I've given you a nice framework document process there, starting with the contracts, then your policies, equity poppy, and your disputes. It doesn't have to be one person doing this. You can have a team of guys looking at doing this. Okay. So I've given you some tips and some guidelines already. I've spoken about these developments in 2027. 2027 is going to be a huge year for, in my view, from the gig economy perspective. Different jurisdictions have already put out some important decisions from a court perspective, foreign perspective, as well as from a legislative perspective. We generally are a few months or a year or two behind, but the gig economy, as an example, is a big one where there's going to be so many trends, so much focus on your space. Keep an eye on this platform. Living wage is always going to increase. It's gone beyond just saying, oh, what's the national minimum wage? They're pushing to an ethical conversation. And unfortunately, my experience is once it gets ethics involved, it becomes a little bit gray because everyone wants to pay X amount, but by the same token, there's affordability challenges at play as well. So there are going to be discussions, as you'll see in the slides, around this. Keep an eye on this, and also bear in mind that where you adopt an above living wage, you're not just paying the basics. Experience shows that usually that leads to people wanting to consciously engage you from a procurement perspective. a lot better. People want to work for you. You retain talent. Not saying money is the only thing. Money is the fifth thing, but one of the things is money. But don't forget, ESG plays a role. Environment, social governance. Pay equity is going to be a big issue next year. Workforce diversity is going to come through more and more. They're going to look at ethical labor practices, and then worker well-being is going to be a massive issue. Your board needs to take this into account. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to unpack this with you, but I'm happy to engage you on the slide afterwards and just talk you through that as well. I've spoken about seekers and opportunities. There's so many good people working in the space. Please ask Professor to help you if you're unsure where to go to. Please let them assist you with this. We've spoken about technology, but my suggestion in closing is the following. So do you give yourself a 90-day action plan? The first 30 days, do a labor law compliance audit. Get a third party in to look at your stuff. Obviously, compliant with POPI, sign your relevant non-disclosure agreements, etc. Look at your CCMA history for the last 24 months. Where's that gone wrong? Where have cases come from? Because then you can identify where the problem areas are. And trust me, sometimes where people have done this properly, you can identify that, geez, that Wilkinson guy, it's in his department. That's where the problems are. Isn't maybe the Wilkinson that's the problem, as an example. Look at your agreements. Do an assessment of that. All right. That for me is the first 30 days. But then when we look at the days 31 to 60s, if necessary, start looking at redoing of employment contracts. Laws have changed. It's a nice opportunity to redo those contracts and use the law changes as your rationale. Train your leaders, please, in how to do this properly. Too often, the ball's dropped at the lower level, and there's a few of you who'd phone me, and I'd say, "What now, guys? How's it possible, guys? You know, how are you recruiting, guys?" Right? Those questions indicate that there's a problem within those systems. What are we doing to address those problems? Why do you need a third party like me to highlight those problems to you? As a business, you should proactively be managing this. Remote work, I'm not too fussed about because I don't think it applies to most of you. It's something that's there, but not as much. What I have suggested, and I think this one, when in preparation, came out stronger for me, was considering a workforce governance committee, right? And I understand you have committees left, right, and center, and you don't want to have too many meetings for the sake of meetings. But why don't you have quarterly compliance reviews in place where you have HR, legal, ops, and finance sort of in the meeting together? You might have this committee already, or you might have a committee or a subcommittee already on this. But what are we doing to make certain that this is in place so there's not this dropping of balls, as per my discussion with you earlier, right? Implementing compliance calendar. You know certain things are coming up for the year. Rather than drop the ball, why don't you put triggers in place? Put AI on it to put your deadlines in place, right? And then obviously, no doubt, track your indicators properly, where the receipts and referrals, etc., so that you can proactively deal with issues popping up in the workplace. Any questions in closing? Because I think as businesses, just from your side, it's important that you ask yourself these three questions, taking away from this presentation and looking at implementing this as well. Okay, so where's the biggest risk? What's your biggest concern? And what's the most important next step you can do as a business going forward? Any questions from your side? Otherwise, we are done. Sorry, I did tell you it's fast and furious today.
I don't see any questions in the chat, Grant, but
Okay, cool.
it was very insightful. Just wanted to mention that we will be sharing this recording as well as your slide deck with everybody. And we will put a little blurb in there with regards to the competition that's being run. So
Cool.
thank you so much, Grant.
Thanks, guys. Cool. But thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. And keep up the good work you guys are doing for the South African labor market. Well done, guys.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys. Take care. Bye.
Bye.